Welcome to Education by Design, the podcast that explores how schools are shaping the future of education by centering on values, embracing community voices, and building systems that work for every student. I'm your host, Phil Evans. In many educational settings, assessment often centres on preparing students for tests, measuring what they know in a way that doesn't always reflect the full range of their skills or creativity. And how many of us have felt this pressure? For some of our students, we wish that they would take more interest in school and therefore care a little bit more about their grades. For other students, grades are such a focus that learning takes a back burner. And yet what we need to remember is that our objectives inform behaviours. What are your high school grades worth to you now? Yes, for some they provided a stepping stone, but for many students their outcomes did not measure up to the end of this chapter in their lives, and they've had to keep moving forward without this currency. I, for one, did not go directly from high school to university. I didn't know what I wanted to do or what I wanted to become, but do you know what? I do now. And I've got to tell you that my high school grades had absolutely nothing to do with it. But what I learned absolutely did. So today I'm talking to Andy Scahill, a professor at the University of Colorado in Denver. Andy's been a mate of mine for many years, but he's a creative that inspires me both personally and professionally. When I visited Denver recently, we got talking about assessment. In his classroom, students no longer write term papers. Instead, they create immersive projects that require them to synthesize complex ideas, collaborate, and engage in real-world applications of their knowledge. And his approach doesn't just measure what students know, it measures their ability to apply that knowledge in authentic, meaningful ways. While this conversation centers on higher education, it's equally relevant for K-12 educators too. Not only is Andy going to talk to us about assessment, but he's going to talk to us about deep learning.
I teach film at the University of Colorado, Denver, in the English department. My pedagogy has changed a lot over the last 2 years, and it's been kind of running parallel with my belief that I would get tenure, because there's a certain way in which until that happens, until I get that job security, my only job security in my field, you have to perform professor in a very traditional dictated sort of way. So when I first started teaching, I was bow tie, blazer in class. If you weren't here, 2 points off. If you were late, 1 point off. I was, checking your works cited page in terms of formatting. In the past, I'd have them do a term paper at the end of the class. A term paper, 10 pages, 5 research sources that you must have found on your own, cited properly within the text. And here's the thing, the more I thought about this, I was like, when in my life has someone asked me to write a 10-page paper? It's like never. It's not a transferable skill unless you're going to academia. But everyone has asked me to create a PowerPoint to talk about something. So why are we teaching that? And so now I have my students do a pitch deck for their cult cinema class. I want them to take a film that they love, that they think is a cult movie, and argue why on one of those slides, and then create an immersive experience around that film. How would you encourage audience participation through the different modes of fandom that we've discussed throughout the class? Like, how do you encourage people to quote along with the film, to create a different type of experience? And so that's what they'll be submitting for their final assignment.
So it's very project-based.
Very project-based. And I've even had a student ask me, one of my students is creating an immersive experience around the movie Grease. So of course she wants to do it in a high school auditorium, and it was like, it should be like a pep rally. And she's like, maybe I'll have like an ear piercing station over here for the good girls and a tattooing station over here for the bad girls. I'm like, I would go to that. And she goes, hey, can I send this to someplace, after I'm done with it? Can I actually send it to a business or a venue? And I was like, That's amazing. Yeah, that's like the ideal, right? That's exactly what this should be.
Absolutely. Andy, this is such a shift. I love it.
Yeah, the start of my career, like I was teaching composition primarily in English departments, and now I teach more film history, film theory. My specialization is in genre, specifically representations of children. But the classes that I teach, one would be like a sort of like intro to film. How do we break down the medium? You know, how do we talk about how film manipulates us and how we can derive meaning or how it's embedded in the text? And so I think I'm teaching visual literacy. How do we understand how to read film as a text? And given that our students get 99% of their information through visual media these days, do they have the skills to analyze? And then I also do a project kind of on the side, which is to create immersive cinema events around cult movies that queer people love, and very much inspired by Rocky Horror. So how do we take something like Bring It On or Death Becomes Her and make it an experience? And so a lot of that informs my teaching as well. I really want students to think about the emotional experience of going to the movies. How does identification work? How do two people of different backgrounds go to the same movie and literally see a different film? So those are more the questions I ask rather than what did Christopher Nolan intend when he did XYZ? I'm more interested in how do the audiences respond.
Such an interesting kind of relationship to culture and conditioning as well. I
Yeah,
think about the cinema that's, of late. The Brutalist was an interesting film because
yeah,
it felt like, why would you ever watch that at home? Like it felt like you had to watch it in community and you had to watch it in the cinema because there's an intermission.
yeah.
What are you going to do at home with an intermission? Probably fast forward it,
Right.
maybe
And
take it. I don't know.
at home, you have complete control over the medium, right? The intermission goes wherever you want it to go. At the same time, that we have this idea of like a cold open in TV, which is you have to grab your audience's attention within 23 seconds, or the algorithm says they will probably change the channel. Whereas you go to the Brutalist, if you're not having a good time within the first 23 minutes, you are not going to pick up and leave, right? Like generally speaking, you are there for the duration of a cinematic experience. And so, yeah, and sometimes we say TV is a medium of distraction, whereas film is a medium of like depth of like introspection, that you are focused on that thing. But even that's changing. And if the new Megan sequel is petitioning to have content be put on your phone during the film screening.
Wow, that
Hmm.
is wild. The world that
Hmm.
we're living in is just so multimodal, and it just makes me, think about the discussion that we had when I came to visit about assessment,
Hmm.
and just the way that a lot of assessments are, compliance driven. Yes, there's skills, there's creative thinking, there's critical thinking embedded, but the students aren't really performing in sort of a more natural,
Hmm.
consistent way. They're sort of coming, to an examination room and sitting down and doing that,
You know
and
what they're really good at, those students? They're very good at taking tests, but that's
yeah.
it. You become really good at faking it, but then that doesn't serve you when you get outside of school, really, unless your job is simply to comply. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It makes you a good cog in a wheel, but it doesn't make you an innovator.
Well said, well said. Andy, do you have any reference points from your own childhood? Like, do you have memories of like a classroom or a teacher where you got to do very project-based or very kind of application-based learning?
So when I was in fourth grade, I got moved into an accelerated program, like Scope is what we called it. And there was a cohort of four of us, myself and three girls, and we went to the special class and kind of heard or noticed through the grapevine that all four of us became professors, which is really fascinating. Yeah, and so Shannon, this girl suggested that why don't we all get together, and because I wanted to see what they remember about this teacher's class with Mrs. Staggy. I remember that we went in every time and we played chess for an hour, and then we did word games, and then we did sort of like theatrical simulations. Like I remember us doing a Civil War debate where we took different roles of representatives from different states. We did a ceremony where we represented a nation in this sort of Walk of Nations. I still have an obsessive amount of knowledge about Singapore, which was my country that I represented.
That's amazing. In the
Yeah.
last episode, I was talking to John Spencer about learning that sticks, and man, like talk about learning that sticks.
Yeah, I remember building dioramas. And for a kid like me,
Hmm.
who was, I would spend months on the project that if you did it, you got 100, and it was, a creative thing. I would spend
Hmm.
months on it, and I wouldn't turn in my homework. Like I hated the drudgery part of it. Anything that felt like it was just busy work, I just wouldn't do it. But I would spend months creating these like I created an elaborate shoebox diorama of White Fang by Jack London. I still remember that.
Hmm.
Um, I have weirdly obsessive details that I remember about the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, because I did a project on that during a unit on the Vietnam War.
Wow.
Anyway, all of us now we get together, and it was very like Losers Club from It.
Doesn't
It's
sound
like
like it to me.
or Stand By Me. You know what I mean? It was like
Yep.
really like, what do you remember about our childhood? Because it was different. Like we were different, right? And we realize now that we're all neurodivergent. That's why we were good at these things. But to your point, like teaching students to take a test, it creates a certain set of life skills, of coping skills that don't last. But teaching students to like innovate, I'm sure you've seen that like pyramid of cognition, where it's like rote memorization is the bottom rung. And I think psychologists say you remember that stuff about 3 months. And then you go up to like analysis.
And evaluation.
Yeah, evaluation, right?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the Bloom's taxonomy, and,
Yep.
and I think the revised one is really cool because it actually puts creativity and creation at the top of the
Yeah.
taxonomy. Like that's the most, the most advanced, application of learning that you
Yeah.
can actually do.
And how long that lasts in your cognition
Right.
versus a regurgitation model.
Hmm.
And
It's
so,
just so much more engaging and sticky.
absolutely.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you who the students are because obviously you'd have some students that want to, that want to pursue film or they're
Hmm.
interested in the arts aspect of it, but you must be attracting students that are taking this course as maybe even a requirement or an
Yeah,
elective.
yeah, absolutely. I'll get a smattering of film production students. For our university, film production happens over in a different department, but largely it is our English students, who typically they only thought about using these methods for literature, and we're asking them to, okay, what happens if you apply psychoanalytic theory to film? What happens if you apply those close reading techniques that we use in literature and transfer them over to film? So instead of word choice, you're looking at symbology, you're looking at tempo of editing, you're looking at soundtrack. So it's really good to kind of get them to see that it all falls under the umbrella of different forms of literacy. And a lot of the
Yeah.
same skills apply.
I also really love the appropriation of text because of the way you're bringing all these different influences into the genre and into the representation.
Hmm.
I really also like the way that you've sort of articulated the way that learning is connected, transdisciplinary, and just how this kind of learning also helps to paint a picture of what kind of learner we are ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it became really clear to me early on that I was not a math kid. And I think one of the habits I learned was that I could write something, I could half-ass something that would be better than most of the kids in class. And so I kind of learned how to fake it. And then when I got into college, I learned how to pad a paper, to take 2 pages worth of ideas and expand it to 8 pages, you know. And those are I think the coping strategies I leaned on when I got to grad school. That doesn't work anymore. And so that was tough. That was a reckoning for me, quite honestly. Um, and I remember one of the most difficult assignments I had, and I've reproduced this in my own classes, is I was taking a grad class and we read Heart of Darkness, and it was a theory course. And so every week we encountered a different body of theory: Marxism, feminist theory, post-structuralism, postmodernism, what have you. And we had to write a paper about Heart of Darkness through that critical frame. The challenging part, though, is that he limited how many words we could use. And I think that's fascinating. I think when you get to that level of graduate school, if they say, write 5,000 words on this, you know how to do it. You can pad that out. If you say, do this complex idea in less than 250 words, that was hard. And my first time, I handed in, I think, 500 words, and he was like, no, half of this. And so that's still an assignment I do today, where I say respond to the film Inception through this framework that we just discussed. And so I said, I want you to think about this film as a metaphor for Hollywood, and that the different characters in this film are the different roles in production. So like the director, the scene setter, the audience, the screenwriter. And then I want you to tell me how that metaphor works in only 250 words. And it's a different skill.
For sure. What were some of the surprising or delightful responses that you got? Like, what do you see in the students?
I think when we tell students to like write in that erudite voice, right, that academic voice, they think that means more words and convoluted prose, right? And so you get these kind of like run-ons. But when you say convey this in a concise format, suddenly, instead of saying the film suggests that blah blah blah, they start to use real words like it challenges, it reinforces, right? And so part of like forcing their hand in conciseness is forces them to use those more direct language.
And it also strikes me that this short, concise writing activity not only has meaning for the writing skills development, but it also opens opportunity for you to be able to have real rich conversations about matter, right? About meaning. And so what kind of feedback do you provide students?
The feedback that I can give one-on-one is so different than the handwritten comments that I like. But I will ask them. I mean, the big turn that I go for is like the so what question, like why are you pointing this out? Let's move from observation. Okay, great, you found something, right?
Why does it matter?
Why does it matter, right? Okay, great, you found a lot of red in this movie. Like the why now question, I think is really important to ask in film. And I'm trained as a historian, so I'm always asking that, like, is it a trend, right? Is this a representative of something larger in the 1960s, or is it an anomaly? And that's cool. We can talk about anomalies as response to dominant discourse. But if it's a trend, if you see other films, other directors also, what was it we were talking about yesterday? Oh, like the heist genre is so obsessed with stardom, right? Like and whereas some genres, it doesn't matter if there's a stardom, like a horror genre, it doesn't matter. But the heist genre is so dependent on stardom and glamour and that sort of thing. And so why? What do we get out of that? What does it do for the audience? Why is it this genre about fighting back against the corporate man has to have actors who we consider to be Hollywood celebrity?
I'm thinking of George Clooney and Brad Pitt and the Oceans kind of thing.
At least today, like what the heist genre animates is like the power of influence over over like legislative power, executive power. Interesting, not surprising in a way that this sort of comes up again in an influencer era, right? Of these people who seem to wield a lot of power, but when it comes down to it, do they actually have the influence that they seem to have? Does it translate to anything else other than adulation within the arts? Can it translate into real social change?
Andy, you do such a good job of articulating the connection or the relationship between what you're teaching and the relevance of it all, and more so the students that you're working with.
These days, I'm teaching towards the student that I was and the student who felt kind of underserved by education. And I really think about like what projects would I have liked to have done when I was a student, or what would have been useful for me. So transferable skills is a big one for me, that whatever they're doing, it should, I hope, like mirror the real world as much as possible. So One assignment I do is a film pitch assignment where, say, I'm teaching a course on Frankenstein in cinema, which is a class I teach a lot, or Wizard of Oz narratives in cinema, or Hitchcock. I have them pitch, let's say, a Hitchcockian thriller at the end of my Hitchcock as auteur class. By doing that, they're demonstrating that they know what Hitchcockian is, right? That they've been paying attention. They know what are the types of stories he tells, what are the camera angles he tends to use, how does he tend to market his films, what ultimately, how are you positioned as an audience? So by the end, by doing the assignment, they show me they know what Hitchcock's style, narrative, and whatever by pitching one in his style. And then I assign them a studio. And so then they have to pitch it to a specific audience, right? It's like rhetorical triangle kind of stuff. And so they have to research that studio. Well, what is A24? What types of films do they tend to make? What have been their hits? And so in the pitch assignment, here's the concept, here's potential casting that I might do, or director that I would choose, and here's why it's a fit for this studio's brand. Here are my marketing materials. Here are my financials. Here's my audience demographic that I'm going after, right? And so they put that together in, I think, like a 10-slide pitch to aimed at that studio. And then myself and two colleagues of mine, we are the studio heads, and we ask questions of them.
So it's interactive. It's not just about the delivery and the production of a product. It's that once you bring that product into the world of and that space of what it would really be like to pitch it. Wow.
And I love to challenge them. If I see a film that's really traditional casting, I was like, why aren't there any people of color in this film? What if there an early review of this film says that it's a politically regressive revenge fantasy? How would you respond to that?
Wow.
Yeah.
The college, setting is not what it was like when we were there anymore. Like there are, progressive experiences where students are collaborating and building, prototypes and creating something. Because as you were talking, I was also thinking about you raised the Bloom's taxonomy, right? Like, I mean, all of the knowledge and synthesis and analysis and evaluation stuff is there, but you're actually functioning at the very top of that taxonomy in the creative space.
Yeah, and the projects that I've gotten, if I have a student in class who is like me, when I was a kid, I've had students create full trailers for these films, and they've been incredible. Social media accounts I've had students create, have had students bring in like bound dossiers. They dress
Wow.
up, they get into it. They come dressed as the characters.
So that's an aspect of the assessment that's sort of unspoken. It's like, here is the task. You're coming to a pitch event. If you have the skills to put together a trailer and to shoot it and to create this sort of theatrical trailer using the technologies that you have, do it.
Yes,
If
absolutely.
you're going to bring together a portfolio, a dossier, do it. Like, I love that.
And there is the kind of immediate application of the act of researching a studio and understanding what their brand is. That is something you'll have to do in the job market. But humanities classes are unique. I mean, one of the things that I say in my classes is that the process is the product. And so if the skill we want you to leave with is how to deconstruct something and how to look at its parts and make an argument, then engaging in discussion in class is like prima facie. And so as my pedagogy is involved, I've more and more really understood the value of just creating an environment where students feel safe to express half-baked ideas or ideas they're not sure are good. So what the greater skill is taking a complex idea and distilling it down to something understandable.
Yes,
I think
that's
it's
it.
harder to take something complex and how does this apply to Twilight? Right? And that was always me, like when I was in English literature classes, it was maybe one of my problems with the way that good lit crit is taught is I was always the guy in the back of the class going, okay, can you play this to real life? You know what I mean? Like, it's all great to talk about the architectonics of knowing, but what does that mean? Like, apply it to something real. So with my events that I'm doing with Rainbow Cult, that is me trying to take a complex theory about queer spectatorship and our relationship to cinema and thinking about different modes of participation rather than passive consumption of media. And let me try and turn that into praxis, into what does an event of that look like? Or to take um, an academic critique of the superhero genre, and I could write a paper about that, or I wrote a play that got into Denver Fringe Festival that is a deconstruction of Batman and the American vigilante fantasy. That's more the stuff I want to do the same critical work, but to do it in a creative form. That I don't have to
Wow.
necessarily jump through the hoop of the academic book like I had felt before.
And your university is supportive of that.
They are. They are. And a lot of universities talk about the value of public scholarship, and I'm happy to say my university's actually put their money where their mouth is on that.
Andy, what would you say would be your sort of underpinning philosophy of approaching assessment, learning and teaching in this kind of integrated way?
Well, I would say they don't have to be assessments. They can be activities. I think the more that you can take away the risk of failing at something, and we become such better deconstructors when we learn to construct. Right? Taking away the parts makes so much more sense when you understand them as parts and not well, that's the way it had to be done. No, no, no. These are all choices, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, so like working with the building blocks makes you able to understand how to take the blocks apart. I mean, for me, if half of their grade is being here, being present, talking in class, engaging, so I'm weighting their attendance and their precipitation pretty high, actually, which I think more humanities courses should do, quite honestly, to really think about the in-class time as the end product. And then I have them do weekly response papers to the texts in which they have to incorporate that week's reading in their response. And again, do a lot of work in a short amount of space. And then their midterm and their finals are more kind of creative projects, but I still have a rubric. I still am grading concept, their ability to apply theory. I am grading the labor that goes into, not like how snappy the graphics are, but how much work does it look like you put into this, right? And so that is kind of like the assessment of it, I would say. And the same sort of unconscious rubric that would probably happen in the real world as they're presenting. If I see a presentation with typos in it, I said, you did this last minute, right? Or you didn't take the time, you didn't take the labor to really invest in this project. I think to encourage people to still be imaginative and to apply frameworks rather than think about the multiplicity of meanings rather than capital M meaning. Just like teach to the student that you were, you know what I mean? Like, what would you have needed or wanted at that stage in your life? What would have actually been inspiring to you?
You've been listening to the Education by Design podcast. I've been your host, Phil Evans. If you like this episode, please hit subscribe or follow and join us for our next episode. And until next time, stay curious.